What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled a crazy neighbor? Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago he had a road rage incident, and when he started banging on the other car's windows the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also he doesn't yell anymore. Called the police on people parked perfectly legal in front of their house. Took pictures of my partner's dad just working in the yard. Disappeared suddenly without a trace and then suddenly come back home in the dead of night 8 months later. Weirdos. Pulled us over pretending to be a police officer. Saying that we had somehow broken the law whilst pulling out of our driveway and that she was going to call it in. She isn't a cop, lol. My sister's neighbor reported my sister to the police because her kids were playing in my sister's garden. Not for the usual reasons. Too much noise, etc. Nope. Because a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would hurt them. My sister lives in the UK. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. Crazy fights. Yelling at all hours of the night. Dude would wander around the hood tweaked out crazy. And once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the second floor window at another dude who was smashing up his car. Screaming, "I'll fucking kill you, motherfucker." Those were interesting times. She has a penchant for going around sticking nails in people's tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street. Though she's slowed down since more people started installing video cams and motion sensor lights in their driveways. Next door lady standing on her driveway yelling at me because acorns have fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto said driveway. Demanding that I cause the tree to cease and desist from this intentional criminal activity. We used to live next to a woman that would have a disco party for her cats in her backyard at 2 a.m. every few days. She would put up a disco ball and party lights with music playing. It was a little bit odd, but what made it crazy was her dancing like a Native American performing a ritual around the disco ball. It's honestly one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed. We bought a house, and on the day while we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us what trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest, but the fucking audacity of some people. He jumped in front of my car while I was driving down the road to yell at me for going through his trash at night. Told him it was probably raccoons. He refuses to believe it to this day. Anyone else here suddenly realize the reason you don't have a crazy neighbor might be because you're the crazy neighbor? My house backs up to a resort. I'm slowly accumulating junk cars near the property line. Eventually they'll build a fence. Then I'll get rid of all the junk. Bam. Free fence. My neighbor in the flat upstairs likes to stand outside my open, ground floor, window at 6 a.m. and argue with her dog. Like, I know you don't want to go home yet. But if you don't stop being a dick, you're not getting your sausage roll. Or I'm not the one who wanted to go out. So what's your problem? Happens at least twice a week. I've heard way more than I need to about their health ailments and bowel movements. One night I'm in the backyard sitting in lawn chairs watching the stars with the wife when she pops out with a flashlight in our faces. I went off. "What the fucking hell are you doing?" She apologized and left with no explanation. I could go on. But then I may start thinking about moving again. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house, checking his sprinkler controls, and looks at my wife. He has 2 huge bushes he refuses to cut. It blocks our view of backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman, "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. Not sure if this counts as crazy, but I have this neighbor who is part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Every time someone in the neighborhood is going through rough times, Especially deaths in the family. She goes to their house and instead of offering condolences she preaches how they should join this organization and things will be better. She doesn't acknowledge anyone the rest of the time except the time when someone dies or a new family moves in the neighborhood to whom she preaches and gives books written by leaders of the organization. She stalks us. Like every time I get home she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier and then ask me why. One time my friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to look at who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me telling me to hurry up BC a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, oh, it's just the stalker neighbor. That was a funny day. His doghouse has electricity. The doghouse sits there in his backyard at night with the light on. Radio going. The dog loves listening to the radio. Apparently. And a small electric fan in summer to keep him cool. It's not so much crazy as, perhaps, a bit eccentric. How many doghouses have electricity, lights, fans, and a radio playing for the dog's enjoyment? My friend's neighbor. Not mine. Carol paints new messages on her exterior wall about the guy across the road, my friend's next door neighbor, about being a drug dealer and a murderer. She randomly drops by to ask if we are dealing drugs and will spend a few days ranting at other neighbors and yelling obscenities until we call the police many times. Granted, the drug dealing neighbor was arrested for drugs and firearms and his best mate was the main suspect of murdering Carol's daughter. She called the FBI on me. Then she would call Crime Stoppers on me. Former crazy neighbor. Here. I, 23 at the time, lived alone in a basement unit in a not great part of town. My bedroom windows, being in the basement, lined up directly with a very busy street filled with bars and lots of traffic. While smoking cigarettes on my stoop, I often had a knife or b-ball bat physically with me. To my neighbors, I often referred to a live-in boyfriend often. Even though I lived alone. At times I will go as far as yelling at my fake boyfriend in my apartment when I heard other people in the hallway storming out of the apartment and telling my neighbors what an asshole my boyfriend was. Also, my neighbors believed I didn't live alone. Well, before I moved back into the house, our tenant thought he saw our neighbor watching his daughters and decided to stab the neighbor. So anyways, we came to the house and it looks like we had to get new sliding glass door and front door since the police broke them down to get to my tenant. It is his second offense, so he is in jail for life. So my neighbors probably thought my tenant is the crazy one. I used to live in a hoa. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. I may be that crazy neighbor. I have 300 houseplants. From the outside looking in, it looks like a jungle. I used to live next to Screaming Guy. It was a cheap apartment and hearing through the walls didn't take a lot of effort. He would yell pretty regularly, at the phone, TV, something. We could never figure out what it was. It was always during the day and we could never find sporting events that corresponded to the yelling times. He was always polite and soft-spoken when we interacted with him in person. Edit, and he lived alone and didn't have any pets we were aware of. The complex didn't allow them and we never saw any. Edit 2. Gaming seems unlikely demographically as he was in his 50s in 2006 to 2008 when we lived there. He was a bit outside of the gaming into adulthood generation. Not impossible though. Stuck a fucking barbecue fork in my cat. Deals Fent. Throws his rubbish out just anywhere on the estate, including prescription drugs spilling out the packet. Lets horrible little 12-year-old run round trying to smash up cars. Play chicken. Bully smaller children and threatens to kill people who tell him to take the brat in hand. Edit. There are also some quirky alcoholics, but they're harmless. We have a neighbor we call the Screamer Lady because when her kids were young she would basically sit at her window and run out and scream at anyone driving by if she felt they were going too fast. Ranting about the safety of her children, who may or may not even be home at that point in the day. To this day she still sits and studies traffic and glares at motorcycles. Her kids are grown thankfully, so the screaming has ceased. My neighbor is called Crazy Dave. He eats way too many tacos and would do everything for a flask of sauce. He's always rambling about zombies. He has very strange plants in his garden and has a time machine. Years ago in rural Arizona we shared a pond with the crazy neighbor. More sad than anything. He was in his 40s and lived with his mother, around 1988. A Vietnam veteran. He would walk out to our shared pond with a 45 and a box of 50 rounds. He would then absolutely unload on the pond while yelling, "Police is brass," and walk quietly home. This happened every 90 days for about 3 years. Hangs out naked or near naked with the curtains and windows open. A lot. It was winter and the ground was covered in snow and ice. My husband accidentally scratched our neighbor's car while parking. Because the car slid on the ice. We rang his doorbell to apologize. He got super angry, not because of his car, but because he had to put on shoes to go outside and check the damage. He never billed us for repairs though. So I guess we got lucky. It's 2 a.m. And suddenly you hear a sound. Going over to the window you look out. Wondering who's making it at that ungodly hour. It's the neighbor. Mowing his lawn. Now repeat this cycle. On the right. There's a bunch of spoiled rich frat boys who are throwing parties if the other neighbor isn't mowing. There are times when I wonder if I am the crazy neighbor. I barely leave the house, and when I do I am always in pajamas. Most of the neighbors avoid me when they see me as well. Not even saying hello in that passively friendly way that people do. I'm probably the crazy neighbor. I stay inside my place most of the time. Going out only to do shopping and go to work. I work 2 days a week and try to do my shopping on the way to and from work. I work nights. I try to do my shopping after dark. I just don't like to be seen watched. I am extremely private and want to be left alone. I grew up on a rural farm where I had privacy. I live in the suburbs now and really hate it. Everyone's always about and watching. And seemingly into everyone's business. Used to live in a little town of 300 people where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over and she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't real confident that they would make it, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me he just likes to be a cat and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. I had a neighbor who once walked into our apartment uninvited because she wanted to complain that we were being too noisy. It was actually a different apartment doing construction, and later gave the whole building bedbugs because she was letting homeless people stay in her apartment. I've got a good one. Where to even begin? He threatened to kill my neighbor's dog because he barked. He would stand at his window at night and look at our house. We could see him because he was illuminated by his TV. He would randomly clap throughout the night. He would also yell randomly at night. As kids he scared the crap out of me and my siblings with his strange behavior. Especially standing at his window at night. Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty. Anyone including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway so no one could turn around it. One time I came home and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. Let his young kid walk around the communal area of a block of flats, with it all on show. Also the same kid answers the door sometimes, again. In the flesh. Cocaine. Then screams at me about politics. Took my parents to court because he lost an Iowa chairman election. Some people just have too much free time. Edit, he actually demanded we pay his legal fees after he lost in court. Twice. Blamed COVID and her teenage granddaughter for not getting a female dog spayed and a male dog neutered. Now the female dog is pregnant and the male dog is to blame. He was in pain. Terminal cancer. I had offered to help. I am a doctor. I have resources. Nice as shit dude. I think Popel mistook his pain. He had rants. And I could only see it as him dying. He keeps telling people about government watching him with drones, neighborhood kids drone actually, poisoning our food. And more recently that Trump was the savior of the world because neo-Nazi vampire child Zeta took over US politics. We are in France. This shit is going way too far. But since Trump went back full-time golfing he calmed down a little bit. Can't wait until he sees the latest UFO trend. He fenced off his house. Not with normal fencing. But random ass sticks and tree limbs. Mine bought a massive old military truck. Designed to carry troops by the look of it. He just parked it in his one-car driveway and packed it in with old, broken down cars. His living room and kitchen were on the second floor and were fully visible from the street via a huge couple windows. He then took all the walls down and rebuilt them to essentially be a climbing gym. Even had holes on the ceiling above the stove. Dude was badass. Everyone hated him. He didn't even climb. The old lady who lived below me left me multiple cryptic letters blaming me for the birds chirping too loudly in the mornings. Not pet birds. The sparrows and shit outside. This went on for months. I have since moved away, but they used to breed fighting dogs and then leave their gate open when they knew kids liked to play at the cul-de-sac. It was a serious problem but nothing that the SPCA wasn't able to fix after receiving dozens of complaints. My guy was married but lived totally separate from his wife. She would visit every so often and he would travel to her too every now and then. Always wondered about that until I got a chance to be invited into his house. A hoarder of garage sale stuff. Dolls and just doll heads scattered around and boxes of toys. And whatever else you can imagine. Only a 2-foot path throughout the house. He also had an overgrown yard full of all kinds of plants. It was kind of cool looking, but seeing an overgrown jungle after some years was a bit concerning. Nice guy and we would share a beer all the time. My best neighborhood friend. Had a neighbor who would chase anyone and everyone off the 5 or 6 spaces of sidewalk in front of her house. All kids would use the road. Because she'd be waiting at nearly all hours of the day and night. She tried to chop her daughter's head off with an axe in her front yard. Never did jail time. Like 20 years later she had an accident and her house caught fire. Never told anyone who responded her dog was locked in the basement. The town paid to have a new house built because luckily for her, the closest fire hydrant wasn't working. She sued. Stood atop his tree trimmer truck yelling "I'm Batman." May not be that weird. But he also had a full Batman outfit on. She has 2 very big persimmon trees that provide a ton of fruit but insists selling them for $2.00 each. All the neighbors scoff at that price and nobody buys any and all that fruit falls to the ground and goes to waste year after year. The lady is in her mid-80s. The adults in the family let their small, but surprisingly aggressive, dog out unleashed and without a muzzle. We live right next to a very busy road and public sidewalk and the dog will often chase children and bark at other dogs. Cars. People. It's a mess and they ignore any reasoning. Funny enough. Their children always have the dog on a leash and apologize if he goes after anyone. Murdered his wife. Dumped her body in the woods, near skeletal remains found over a year later. And due to lack of anything beyond, very damning, Circumstantial evidence. Actually got away with it. At least he has so far. It's only been a couple years. Not kidding. Get drunk in the morning. Sing like a peacock high on LSD in the afternoon. Have a conversation with the other crazy neighbor 3 houses down from her balcony in the evening. Then have a screaming contest on the phone after midnight. My crazy neighbor yells out his window about killing the kids next door to him. The cops show up. He goes on meds for a few months and is fine. Then he randomly starts up again with the yelling. It's great. One time he threw a bucket of his pee out into the middle of the road while yelling at me that he wanted to have relations with my dog. Country boy moved to the city into the house next to mine. Landlord had done a terrible job with upkeep, so the backyard was covered in dead brush and overgrowth. Country boy saw country boy problem and employed the best country boy solution he could think of. He lit it all on fire the day after he moved in. He took it upon himself to mow my lawn while I was at work. My mower broke and I couldn't get it fixed. Needed to wait until next payday. Ran over a rock in my yard. Damaged his mower. And asked that I pay to replace the blades. Dude, I didn't even ask you to mow my lawn. She dug up my fancy flowers and replanted them in her own yard. 15 feet away. The downstairs neighbors next door seem to have completely ignored her back for a number of years. It's a completely overgrown mess. I can't really complain though, because a family of foxes seem to be living there now and they have adorable little fox cubs that I can see from my bedroom window. Once dated a girl who lived across from Frank the Tank. Frank was a large man who didn't much like his wife. So he would spend hours on his riding mower basically going over the same 130 SQFT while sipping Coors Lights. Always in shorts that may have fit at one point but now made his thighs look like biscuits popping out of a can. Never a shirt. He would jiggle immensely. He also liked to watch the local younger girls run around. Threatened to put giant signs across a wooded border between our properties if my other neighbor got into another border dispute with him. This was after stopping my excavator from doing his job, finished grading the lot so we could plant grass, and threatening him if he got over the property line. He was 50 feet away from it and not taking down any trees. He finished his rant and left without ever introducing himself. When he's not complaining to the cops about my neighbor, he's doing everything legally possible to annoy the cops themselves. The people behind me have 4 kids who run amok at most hours of the day. They have a giant sign in their front window that says Jesus loves you. They also screamed at me and my roommate for hanging bird feeders and having a squirrel feeder because it brings too much wildlife into the neighborhood. Tried to steal everyone's land. They started building in our neighbor's yard and then sued them when they were told to stop. Apparently they had to go through a fence. The law told them to stop stealing people's land. We didn't hear anything about it until our neighbor put up a giant privacy fence facing crazy neighbor only. We asked about it and found out we very nearly could have been next if things didn't escalate for our non-crazy neighbor first.